Yeah, please. I think your name is. So I think we can now start the panel with the business. The aim of this conference is obviously to look at all the possibilities for investments in Ukraine, in the energy sector. We have heard about the reforms which have already taken place and those which are being implemented in the gas, electricity, energy efficiency sector. We also heard from our Vice President Šefčovič what the Commission is doing to facilitate that reform, and we heard from the EIB how much money the EIB can be spending in it. But we would like now to hear in rather short statements in the beginning from the industry where we are and what can be done, what can be improved, and what's happening right now. But first of all, I would like Ms. Karp, who is the Deputy Minister for Energy and Coal Industry in Ukraine, to start. Please, the floor is yours.
Дякую за надане слово і можливість виступити. Перш за все, дозвольте висловити вдячність стороні Євросоюзу за постійну підтримку у процесі реформування енергетичного сектору економіки. Зокрема, пану Шефчовичу за сьогоднішню оцінку роботи в цій галузі. Нам дуже приємно, що нова команда уряду, теперішня і попередня, за 2 роки, як було сказано, зробила більше, ніж було зроблено за попередні роки. Міністерство надалі буде продовжуватися курс на проведення системних і глибоких реформ в енергетичній сфері, на підвищення рівня енергетичної безпеки, розвиток конкуренції, захисту прав споживачів. Першим віце-прем'єром Кубів вже були наведені факти щодо тих законопроєктів, які прийнято Верховною Радою України для імплементації законодавства України до вимог 3-го енергетичного пакету. Це, зокрема, прийнятий закон України про ринок природного газу, закон України про національного регулятора, а також в першому читанні закон України про ринок електричної енергії. Важливим для нас також є і підписання у листопаді місяці меморандуму щодо взаєморозуміння щодо стратегічного партнерства в енергетичній сфері між Україною та Європейським Союзом, який є хорошим інструментом для інтенсифікації нашої спільної роботи. Щодо НБАНКів НАК «Нафтогаз України» більш детально зупиниться пан Андрій Коболєв з цього приводу. Але хочу ще наголосити, що сьогодні українська сторона докладає максимум зусиль щодо відродження нафтопереробної галузі, збільшення газодобутку, про що проінформував вас пан Кубів. Також хочемо доповісти вам, що на сьогодні міністерством проводиться системна робота щодо підготовки енергетичної стратегії розвитку України до 2035 року, яка буде дороговказом для учасників бізнесу і для інших структур щодо розвитку енергетичного ринку в Україні. Ми надіємося, що протягом 2017 року ми завершимо цю роботу, і вона буде стратегічною дорожньою картою по всіх напрямках енергетики. Хочу ще раз підкреслити продовження виступу пана Кубєва, що українська сторона є надійним транзитером природного газу і забезпечує безперебійну роботу газотранспортної системи України. Тому ми розраховуємо на солідарність Єврокомісії та країн ЄС у питаннях збереження ролі України як основної транзитної держави. З певністю можу сказати, що Україна сьогодні, як ніколи раніше, перебуває на стадії модернізації всіх галузей енергетики. І уряд України докладає значних зусиль до реформування енергетичної сфери та її інтеграції до енергетичної системи Європейського Союзу, відповідно до зобов'язань, визначених угодою про асоціацію і між Україною та Європейським Союзом. Всім учасникам конференції бажаю плідних та змістовних дискусій для досягнення необхідних практичних результатів. Дякую за увагу.
Thank you very much. So a lot is happening. The gas market reforms are being implemented. I think what we would like to hear from Mr. Kobolev from Naftogaz is really, are there any challenges? What's about the unbundling, which the Deputy Minister just mentioned? So how is Naftogaz reforming in that overall system? The floor is yours, Mr. Kobolev.
Thank you very much for gathering here and for this opportunity to speak about Ukrainian gas sector reform. I would like to start immediately with the progress Ukraine has achieved so far in terms of implementing European legislation in the gas sector. As you all know, in 2011, Ukraine became party to the treaty establishing energy community, and since then, a lot of progress has been achieved. Firstly, in April 2015, we adopted certain energy package compliant gas market law, which became a foundation for further development of all subsequent regulation. In the fourth quarter of 2015, we managed to adopt certain energy package compliant again, tariff methodology, security of supply rules, national prevention plan, etc. In January 2016, the independent regulator implemented new tariffs based on entry-exit approach and also R&B methodology. What we still have to achieve, and that's quite a significant steps to be made in the nearest half a year. Firstly, we need to finalize our Stockholm case, where we are trying to make Gazprom basically follow the rules of the third energy package in Ukraine. Unfortunately, all attempts to convince our Russian counterparties to act in accordance with regular European practices and regulation have not been successful. That is why we had no choice but to go to the court and try to make them follow the rules through the tribunal decision, which we expect to happen, the first one in the first quarter of 2017 and the second one by the end of the second quarter. This is also connected with implementation of fully compliant network codes, which we believe can happen somewhere in April 2017, which will bring existing network code, which has been already severely amended, in full compliance with third energy package. In particular, we are aiming to implement daily balancing rules, which so far are not the case in the Ukrainian gas market, and other elements which are critical for transparent and efficient market development. In June 2017, right after the Stockholm decision, we believe that Ukrainian GTS unbundling may start, and that unbundling is connected with is fully connected with our ability to reassign existing gas transit contract from Naftogaz to a new, fully independent and unbundled gas operator. We also hope that our today meetings, which have happened with the help of Mr. Shevchevich and European Commission, will help us attract proper European partner, which will be co-running Ukrainian gas transmission system. And that is one of the key reasons why I'm here today, is exactly why, because we are discussing our progress in terms of developing new business model and what new steps can be taken and should be taken in order to allow European companies to participate in such operation. If you look at numbers, all these changes I described have allowed us to achieve the fact that the share of private importers of gas to Ukraine has increased from 1% to 24% in just 1 year. This number is growing, and when Naftogaz will stop being a party which is obliged under public service obligation mechanism to supply gas to specific consumer categories, the share of private importers is likely to increase to 50% in 2017. Share of private suppliers to the industry has reached 93%. Naftogaz itself is now counterparty with 15 major international players who are supplying all gas from European direction. As you probably know, we have not been buying Russian gas for more than a year, and it seems, looking at this progress so far, or I would say lack of progress, negotiating with Gazprom, that we may be not capable of having another contract for this winter, so we'll have to stay with European supplies only. Speaking of practical interest from European TSOs, we are currently in discussions with 3 major European companies who have expressed their interest in bundling of Ukrtransgaz, or so-called Ukrainian GTS operator. I guess you have seen and probably know the numbers of current situation of gas supply from EU to Ukraine. So I guess to save some time, we'll skip the slide. And I would like to go straight to the timeline for TSO unbundling. What has happened already and what needs to happen in order to make sure that we are compliant with the timeline which was agreed with European Energy Community Secretariat. Firstly, we need to incorporate new TSO under the Ministry of Energy, and that has been done. This company already exists. What still has to be done in 2016 is to create new corporate governance mechanism which will allow the new company to be managed in accordance with the high Western standard of transparency, efficiency, and non-corruption. The next step, which will be taken in 2017, will be focused, as I mentioned, on updating further Ukrainian legislation and sub-legislation, obtain resolution of dispute in Stockholm, and then we can transfer all fixed assets from existing legal entity Ukrtransgaz to a new legal entity which is already created and will be managed by the Ministry of Energy. When this process is over, then Ukraine will be able to attract international partner to cooperate the newly established GTS operator. This is the milestones I just described in terms of the previous slide. Here they shown in the timeline. So our assumption is that by the end of April 2017, we should be ready with all technicalities to proceed further. And as soon as Stockholm decision is there, we'll be able to finalize the process, and the new TSO should become effective and fully operational. Why we have chosen not the simplest and not, as many people believe, the obvious and simple route by simply removing existing legal entity from Naftogaz Group into a new company. This slide shows 4 reasons why we believe that existing legal entity is no-go for any feasible international partner who would be willing to be engaged in operating Ukrainian GTS. Firstly, a huge amount of loss-making non-core business, which destroys shareholder value. Second, non-transparent management structure, which is not compliant with OECD principles so far, and we believe that instead of simply trying to implement OECD principles under the existing legal entity, it would be much more feasible to create a totally new structure and start from the scratch. This will both save time and make system more efficient and more predictable. The third element, which we believe is a poison pill, is a huge number of legal disputes which existing legal entity has with different counterparties about gas in the storage, about financial claims. All of them have total value of approximately 16 billion cubic meters of gas. In the counterparties under question there are Mr. Kolomoisky and Mr. Firtash. We believe that even if there would be a company in Europe who would be willing to deal with Ukrainian GTS, definitely these people would need to discount heavily for potential risks incurred because of such potential litigations. Therefore, removing this risk will significantly improve value for Ukrainian GTS for any international company. All of this, as a summary, would create significant risk for any due diligence process run by potential counterparty. That is why the new legal entity has the following advantages. Firstly, only core assets, which create clear value proposition for potential investor. It also means that part of underground gas storages should not be transferred, because any financial analysis so far has been proving that part of underground gas storages under Ukrainian GTS are simply not economically viable and are not of any interest for international counterparty. The new company should have OECD-compliant corporate governance structure. The new legal entity will be definitely immune to the legacy problems. So basically, we are trying to offer our potential partner clean, transparent, and efficient structure which will give them clear value and which will give direct and specific answer as to why someone should come and invest in Ukrainian GTS. I guess that's all. There is one issue that Mr. Kubiu asked me to comment about, that the accusation from Russian side, was there any risk for gas which is being transited through Ukrainian territory to be subject of claims from Anti-Monopoly Committee. There is a formal explanation which is now available at the website of Anti-Monopoly Commission, which clearly says that there was no and there is no intent to pursue any seizure of assets except for financial claims, and it's highly likely that the Anti-Monopoly Commission of Ukraine will try to do it outside Ukraine to make sure there is comfort for Gazprom and European gas consumers, that there is no risk for gas transit through Ukrainian territory. So we believe that problem is artificial. Moreover, we would like to draw attention to the fact that Gazprom is currently also under anti-monopoly investigation in many European countries, and that probably should not be the reason why someone should try to avoid playing by the rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also for this additional answer to the question we got in the previous panel. Let me go to Mr. Denis Simoneau, who is the Director for International and European Affairs at ENGIE, formerly Gaz de France Suez. And my question would also be a little bit, we spoke about European investment, European companies going to Ukraine. ENGIE is a big energy player, so what do you see for opportunities for ENGIE in the Ukraine right now? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yes, ENGIE, as you've seen, is already dealing with Ukraine, and we are very glad to be part of this partnership between Ukraine and the European Union. ENGIE is present in 18 member states today, and so we are doing business with a lot of countries, not only within the European Union, but outside. We think that Ukraine is definitely a strategic country for transit of gas. I mean, we know from history that a lot of gas has transited through Ukraine, and it's very important for the European Union member states. And as you said, we are coming from a long history from Gaz de France and Suez, and Gaz de France opened an office in Kiev in 1993. And we have started to work with Ukraine since that date. What I wanted to say as a starter is that we are very impressed by all the reforms, and Andrei Kobolev was speaking about the unbundling of Naftogaz, but we must recognize also what was done in terms of reforms in the energy sector in general, with the increase of gas tariffs, with the reforms that has been implemented in the country, but also in the economy in general, because there were some strong decisions, Mrs. Deputy Minister, in the budget, in the fiscal stance, in the anti-corruption with the creation of an ombudsman. And so we believe that Ukraine is on the right track to attract the foreign investors, and so we wanted to congratulate the Ukrainian authorities for that. What is the situation in terms of the presence of ENGIE today? Actually, we started to sell some gas in 2013, first to DTEK and Naftogaz. And we are today, in 2015 and 2016, the first seller of gas to Ukraine. That could be strange to you, but you must know that Ukraine is one of the biggest markets in terms of gas in Europe, with 35 BCM, and we sell 3.5 BCM to Ukraine, which is almost 20-25% of the imports of the country. And we have decided to open an office there in summer 2016 on energy management, which means that we believe strongly in Ukraine, not only for selling gas, but also, as I will comment in a minute, on other kind of businesses that we can develop. Let me just, before coming to these new developments, on the context, the situation that we are seeing today in Ukraine. I think that there are, let's say, maybe two concerning evolutions that we should commend. The first one is that, you know, the energy sector in general is living an energy revolution today. You know, we are living in a totally different world of energy, and I'm sure that you agree with that. And the Commission has taken that into account with the winter package in particular and the energy union. That's something that means that we have to probably change a little bit the way we are doing business. The second concern that I wanted to mention today is the fact that, you know, we believe that the US was a strong supporter of the reforms in Ukraine, for sure. And we are still looking at what could happen after the elections in the US. And so we believe that the EU should be very strong and very supportive of Ukraine because of this situation. But let me say there are three positive signals as well. The first one is the reforms that I've spoken about and are real reforms in Ukraine. Secondly, I think that the Ukrainian government is very committed to business, and the creation of a business council would be very good news, and we are looking forward for the creation which was announced by the Prime Minister Grossman. And third, I think there is a large support from the IFIs, the international financial institutions are very supportive of Ukraine, which is good news. Not only the European Investment Bank, as we have heard, but also the EBRD, the World Bank, the IMF, everybody is there, and so I think it's a good news as well for the business and for the companies. So what are we looking at as NG? I think that, you know, if you look at the energy policy of Ukraine, there are three pillars for the new energy policy. The first one is to increase the gas market, both by domestic production but also by importation. So we are here and we are available for continuing our partnership with the Ukrainian companies. Second, there is a strong energy efficiency program. We have spoken about that this afternoon as well. But you know that ENGIE is one of the global leaders in the world in energy efficiency, energy services. And so we believe that we have a lot of competencies to accompany this policy as well. And the creation of energy services companies, for instance, the new law that you have adopted, is a very good signal as well. And third, the National Renewable Energy Action Plan is also something very interesting. We are also, as ENGIE, pretending to be one of the leaders of the renewable energy in the world. Not only in Europe but in the world, and so we are also very prepared to support this move towards renewable energy. So in a conclusion, I would say that first of all, we really congratulate Ukraine for the reforms. Second, we are ready. We are already there, and so we are ready to develop our business in the country. And third, we encourage the Ukrainian authorities to continue the implementation of all these reforms, including the very ambitious energy policy programs that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simoneau. I think that was rather encouraging to see the example of a European business and what is set up in the Ukraine. Let me now go to Mr. Timchenko from DTEC. We heard a lot about the successful reforms in the gas sector. There is a little less so reforms or progress on the electricity sector. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more what's happening on the electricity side, maybe also on the renewables implementation in the Ukraine, and what your company can contribute to this, or more progress on the electricity side. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I'd like to introduce our company, DTEC, is a Ukrainian company, and we practically have presence in all sectors in energy industry of Ukraine, except 100% state-owned nuclear. So I'm really glad to have such a Ukrainian Energy Day in Brussels and discussion at the highest official level. It means that changes will happen since we have such an intention from our European partners, and future of the tech is fully depends on how successfully we'll go through this route. Based on my experience working in Ukraine for the last 10 years, I have strong belief that private sector should be locomotive of all the changes, reforms, and the main source of investments in energy sector. So I use any opportunity having such conference and meetings to promote Ukrainian energy sector and to invite European and foreign companies to come to Ukraine and to help us with all these changes. There are a lot of areas for investments, but today I want to concentrate just on 3 of them, and probably it's something that is in line with what was just mentioned as an interest from ENGIE. So the first one is gas sector, and I don't want to repeat what was said by Mr. Kobolev. A lot of progress was in this sector for the last 2 years, and this is really reforms which we can all be proud of. And immediate result of this on the picture, you see that we have about 0 import from Russia. We have increase of production by private sector. I think it's really important to see that we managed to double production of gas from private sector over the last 5 years. And you can see our numbers. We since 2013 we triple production of gas, and there is no really difficult to do that. You just need to run business transparently, invite professional team and modern technologies. And I repeated several times that in 5 years' time, Ukraine can be in a position not to discuss it again and again as we do it in Brussels in December about import of Russian gas or import of any gas, but be 100% self-sufficient in gas. And talking about this area, I think that there are a lot of opportunities not only for gas trading, as it was mentioned by ENGIE, using storage capacities and new regulations in terms of trading, but also in gas production. So talking about synchronization, it's a long story also. We talk about synchronization of our energy systems for 10 years already. And my strong opinion that it shouldn't be so difficult. Yes, from technical point of view, studies should be continued, but in terms of investments, based on our calculations and our position from experts, it's only needs about 5 years' time investment, up to 300 million euro to get prepared our thermal power stations and in total the system to come to the position that country is fully synchronized with the energy system. In this case, we have about 4 gigawatt of capacity for exchange, and we're talking not about export but also import of electricity. And these are the real things which can bring Ukraine to energy market of Europe by real activities. And I think it will be a really serious sign for all European companies that you can be sure that not only technically but from regulatory environment you can come to Ukraine and work and treat it as a European market. And the third area of interest is renewables. Today, this is our strategic priority, and the tech is going to continue our investments into renewable sector. Today, we own the largest wind farm, not only in Ukraine, but in Central Europe, to 100 megawatts. We are planning to start construction of another wind farm with the same capacity, double of capacity of renewables in our portfolio in the middle of the next year. Ukraine is very good for wind technology, and we based on experts research, we have up to 16 gigawatt of capacity of wind to be produced. And I believe that coming back to strategic discussion, the future of the Ukrainian energy sector, we can consider up to 25% of renewables in generation mix of Ukraine. So these three areas can be considered by international companies when they're making this strategic decision about Ukraine. And as already said, we don't want to feel alone on this market. We want to have colleagues in discussion with the government, in discussion with the regulator, in promoting of Ukrainian energy sector. And in conclusion, I'm really pleased that last month new memorandum was signed with strategic priorities and with a commitment from European Union that Ukraine and Ukrainian energy sector will stay as an important part of discussion with our country. But sometimes in Ukraine the situation is that we can make strategic statements, announcement or adopt laws but not implement it. It's not coming real. So what is really important is that as it's written in memorandum, we have annual plan with very concrete targets, and I would like that 3 goals will be considered for the next year. The first one is electricity law to be adopted. The second is incentive-based regulation. And the third part is just come out of my mind. But anyway, if we have 2 of them, it will be a very good result. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the way, we are just now drafting this first action plan together to implement the Memorandum of Understanding. And there are a couple of priorities which we are now discussing. And what you said about the electricity reform and renewables, this is certainly part of it. Let me now turn to Dr. Konstantin Stachus, who's the Secretary General of ENTSO-E. And I think it would be also interesting to see not only what's happening in the Ukraine from the TSO side, but also how to better integrate the European and the Ukrainian TSOs. How is the cooperation working? And how do you see it as Secretary General of ENTSO-E? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to describe this from the viewpoint of ENTSO-E, the European Network of TSOs, which means 42 TSO companies from 35 countries. Let me start not with the details of the possible types of interconnection between continental European synchronous area and Ukraine, but let me rather start with a more general view on the benefits of electricity interconnection Europe-wide. If you have followed the publications of ENTSO-E's 10-year network development plans, over the last years, every 2 years, beginning in 2010, then you will have noticed that consistently we've been finding in the detailed systematic studies of how much more transmission is needed Europe-wide and why, that the European energy transition with more and more fluctuating renewables in the system, wind and solar, in all kinds of parts of Europe, has been leading to clear conclusions that about twice as much interconnection capacity between countries is needed now than used to be needed 10 years ago or so. And that's because of the renewable energy, regional and temporary surpluses and deficits that's inherent in the kinds of resources like wind and solar that depend on the weather. You will again and again have surpluses, but also deficits in particular regions when the wind is blowing, sun is shining, or when they are not. Once you go on a regional basis, and once you go on a pan-European basis, beyond certain minimum penetration levels of those fluctuating renewables. And this is what we've been seeing in our 10-year plans when we were looking at the year 2020, and this is certainly what we're seeing again and again on a quantitative, simulated basis, hour by hour, when we're looking at the year 2030, as we are doing now for the past few iterations of the 10-year plan. So that means the benefits of electricity market integration are bigger than ever. In the past, they were already pretty big and have led to the synchronous area expanding, DC lines being built to integrate more and more markets on a continental scale. There were always the benefits that if you integrate the electricity markets, you save reserves. For the same cost, you become more reliable, or you can get the same joint reliability done for cheaper, significantly cheaper. There were always the benefits of structural imports and exports, giving economic value to the partners on both sides, to the exporters and the importers, to the ones that have cheap production, perhaps when there's enough rain in the Nordics, cheap hydropower, or the integration of hydropower in the Alps, and coal-fired power in Germany in decades past. But with the renewables coming into the system now as part of a long-planned energy transition that fits well with the Paris Agreement from a year ago. Now there's a third big reason for energy market integration, which is that the temporary surpluses and deficits can happen any place, any time. And the transmission system is a cost-effective enabler of turning a surplus that might have zero value. If there's enough wind or enough solar in a certain region and the wind is just blowing too much for that region, turning zero value into much more than zero value if it can be transported on a continental scale somewhere else. So we believe that in principle, the market integration business case is becoming better and better. But it needs to function well. It still needs to be studied well, because as you keep increasing the electricity market, and more importantly, as you keep increasing the synchronous area with its stability issues, you need to be very careful to do it right. So one clear conclusion, of course, is that just like on the gas side, we need the network codes that on the electricity side we've been developing. We're very pleased the Commission is putting one after the other into a legal binding status. Let's keep in mind that they cover the system operations aspects in a lot of detail. They cover the system connection rules for large power plants like nuclear or coal-based, and for small decentralized generation like solar, rooftop, or wind. And of course, they also cover, very importantly, detailed market conditions, which we keep developing, and to connect any country that hasn't been connected yet in its totality, like Turkey or Ukraine or Moldova, it will become so much easier to connect it based on the market network codes than on rules that would have to be invented case by case. And the energy community is of great help to make this happen and to get the network codes into a binding status in its contracting parties. And of course also the electricity law that we've discussed before here today will be very important as an enabler and as the basis for all future market integration progress. Let me finally, after these introductory words, come to the question of synchronous operation. Let's recall that since the year 2002, there's been successful synchronous operation between the Boschton Island and the continental European synchronous area. We appreciate that a lot. It helps us on the western side for our system operation also, and we can build on that. Now, the synchronous operation application from Ukrenergo already predates the existence of ENTSO-E and is indeed 10 years old, as you mentioned. We have now finally, after all these years, completed the feasibility study, the first big feasibility study in an official nature. And there was the closing conference in Kiev on the 20th of September 2016, where of course ENTSO-E participated and commented the results of the feasibility study based on analysis of that study that had, in the month preceding that September conference, been taking place within the ENTSO-E bodies. And that ENTSO-E opinion, of course, in general was positive, since the study had been done with close cooperation with the ENTSO-E partners and a consortium made up of ENTSO-E members, among others. But there are a few technical aspects that I don't want to go into very much detail of that need a lot of attention for the coming 3 to 5 years that are needed to make synchronization a success. And I'll come back to the question whether it's 3 years or 5 years and what that depends on, in my opinion. The stability studies are obviously a really big part, because if you have a continental scale system, which we do have in Europe, which, for example, North America does not have, then the bigger it gets, especially geographic expansion-wise, and especially if there's large concentrations of power plants and demand at the new geographic edges, perhaps in eastern Turkey, then it becomes very, very difficult, but also very important for the overall avoidance of blackouts in that big continental region, to do this just right, to study stability with the exact right data, and to put the power system stabilizers, little electronic boxes, into just the right power plants all over the system, all over the continent, with just the right tuning. And in the case of Turkey, that's taken us years to do this right. An additional problem that's quite important is the frequency containment reserve, meaning the totally automatic reserves that kick in the Ukrainian power plants when there's a frequency deviation, especially a frequency drop. This was not necessary in the past with the integration into the Russian system, and it will be necessary now. It will be absolutely necessary to go successfully through a standalone test of the Ukrainian power system by itself, disconnected from the Russian system. And of course, it will be absolutely crucial for the Ukrainian system to contribute positively and not negatively to the stability of the overall continental European power system. So this island operation test is obviously a crucial milestone coming up for, now my notes are being sidetracked by somebody trying to call me. Okay, I found them back. There'll be a new SCADA system programming necessary. There'll be under-frequency load shedding necessary. Those are important detailed tasks. And one thing that we should not get too confused by, but also take quite serious, is that if we're informed correctly, there'll be at least one DC line funded by the World Bank and the EIB, if I remember correctly, coming from Romania to Moldova and changing the overall picture. So it's not a pure synchronous interconnection, it's a hybrid synchronous interconnection, and how to study that precisely needs to be figured out very clearly. We may also not want to forget the option of a complete DC interface. But if I come to my conclusion now, ENTSO-E has created a project group, like we always do for these synchronous studies, Ukraine/Moldova, to draft the catalog of measures of all the different kinds of measures of which I've mentioned just a subset that will be necessary for synchronization. And in order to get this done within hopefully closer to the 3-year time frame than the 5-year time frame that we have needed in the past, you need a really, really good team. You need a good team on the ENTSO-E side, and you need a really good team on the Ukrenergo side to have a lot of bite and focus on what's needed, to not ignore the DC lines, to not ignore the pure DC interconnection option in case it might be the fastest one, but to not be sidetracked by it away from its focus on synchronization either. And that means quite a few resources and fantastic focus on making the overall market integration occur as fast as it possibly can, so that in the end, you don't spend more money than necessary, but you do spend the money that's necessary quickly once it's clear where it needs to be spent, and that the benefits for the consumers on the European side of that interconnection, and of course, especially on the Ukrainian side of that interconnection, so that these benefits become a reality as quickly as they can. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, these benefits are growing with every windmill and every solar panel we introduce in the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this more detailed explanation on the electricity TSO side. Last but not least, we haven't heard much today, this afternoon, about nuclear. So I would like to give the floor to Michael Kirst from Westinghouse. One question is obviously, how do you see the future in the Ukraine from your company perspective? But also, what about nuclear safety, which is a concern here for the EU, but also for Ukraine? Please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start actually with making a few comments based on the Deputy Prime Minister's comment. And one of the things that he talked about and really wanted to emphasize was energy security. He mentioned energy security, and he mentioned energy independence. And what most people, when we think about Ukraine and energy supply, we often put it in the context of gas, because gas is always getting the headlines. However, what most people also don't realize is that gas, for the most part, is not providing much electricity in Ukraine. So we need to divide these two issues. When we talk about energy, you have gas as primarily a heating source and electricity and power supply, and that is in the context of this particular issue, nuclear. Nuclear now represents 65% of the entire country's electricity supply. And I would say, and I know this is going to sound particularly provocative in Brussels, thank God it does. Because think about what has happened in the last 3 years that was also referenced by the Deputy Prime Minister. The CEO of DTEK here lost substantial amounts of his assets in the Donbass region in his coal deposits. And if it was instead 65% coal instead of 65% nuclear, what would be going on in Ukraine today? We'd have much more issues with regard to energy security. So this is something that I think everybody needs to recognize and acknowledge, and therefore we need to plan for. And why we are here and why Westinghouse is speaking today is primarily how we address that issue. The Ukrainian government in 2014 approached us, saw this huge threat, and said to themselves, we need a very, very significant energy diversification plan. And it needs to go well beyond the things that we've been working on for over 10 to 15 years. And I'll cut to the quick end conclusion. Today, based on the work between ourselves and Energoatom, who's represented by the Deputy President here, we reached an agreement that essentially allows Westinghouse, at any notice by the Ukrainian authorities, Energoatom and the government, to come in to the market and essentially fully replace the Russian nuclear fuel supply. Now keep in mind that up until 2014, when we made this agreement, we were only supplying one of 15 reactors. That is a very small portion, and it was obviously not at the level that was going to give Ukraine the confidence. Next year, we will load 6. And we have now finished the construction of a building in Sweden where we can manufacture all 13 of the VVR-1000 reactors, or the vast majority of the total nuclear fuel supply for Ukraine, if necessary. So Ukraine has now done what a lot of people are looking for in some of their other countries. And I would also mention, and the Commission knows this well, it's ironic because none of the EU countries that operate VVR reactors in the EU, with the exception of Finland at one point, have diversified. So they are at 100% nuclear fuel dependency in the EU, yet Ukraine has now diversified and secured their supply. So this is something where I think we're asking the Ukrainians to come to the EU, provide their experience, provide their perspective to those countries in Central and Eastern Europe that's still dependent. And I think that's what this conference and this discussion is about, is it's not just EU providing things one way, it's of course Ukraine providing their experience the other way. And on that note, since there is again a lot of discussion on gas, and I'm surrounded by my gas friends here, I believe, and I'd be interested to hear their opinion, that by diversifying and securing the nuclear fuel supply, it has also enhanced their ability to negotiate on the gas side. Because we've also seen in other countries, those two commodities, although nuclear fuel is really not a commodity, but those two energy sources from the other supplier is often combined in negotiation space. And so this is makes it much more difficult for countries to take independent decisions. So on that note, I just wanted to mention that this is an important breakthrough for Ukraine, and it's often overlooked. On nuclear safety, the Ukrainian nuclear plants, through the help of the EIB, who is here, has provided 300 million euros in assistance, plus the EBRD in London, have provided significant amount of capital. Energoatom has a multi-year program with their methodically going through to make sure that they're meeting all of the latest EU and international safety standards. However, with that said, the IAEA has already certified these reactors to be safe, operationally and otherwise fit for service. So what we're trying to do basically is to meet the post-Fukushima adjustments that have been put out in the fleet in Europe, but it really does not require these investments from the standpoint of continued safe operation. You can bet that these reactors are very well run and very well equipped. So from that standpoint, we're very pleased. Westinghouse, on that note, built a facility in Kharkiv, Ukraine, roughly 15 years ago, where we've hired 200 engineers that used to make missile guidance systems for the SS-18 weapon nuclear arsenal, and we retrained them to make nuclear safety equipment. And it's a really, again, very good story, and not only from the standpoint that we now use them to implement the latest technologies in Ukraine, but because they are such excellent engineers and really quite qualified in many areas, we actually now bring them into Western Europe and employ them on sites in Western European reactors to be able to work with them and gain from their knowledge. So this is again an example of where Western European companies in the energy space can provide Ukraine with support, but we also should be providing Ukraine with opportunities going the other direction. Finally, I'll just say that, and again, Energoatom is aware of this idea. We believe there is energy efficiency that can be done, but not an energy efficiency, again, that's viewed in the context in Brussels, but the operation of the nuclear plants. While they are fully safe, that some are not operating at 90 to 95% capacity, which is often the average in many countries. By investing a very small amount, we believe we can increase the amount of energy in those units, and by doing that, that's less energy that's needed from some other plant, and that I think is also a very important point. And then finally, is this energy bridge to Poland? Because if you are able to secure your fuel, you make sure that the plants are safe and economical, they're obviously going to be very attractive export vehicles, and that will be very important for the Ukrainian entity, operator, and the government for future revenues and stability. So that's a quick summary.
Thank you very much. I think you got rather a full picture of what's happening either in the Ukraine or with the European countries, learning from each other, integrating better the markets. We have maybe a few minutes to have some questions. Are there any questions from your side? No, everyone is exhausted. Then I would like to thank the panelists. I think that gave us an excellent opportunity. We learned a lot about different stages happening in the countries, investments provided by European companies, by Ukrainian companies, by TSOs, by ENGIE and in the gas sector in the Ukraine. So this is a very important step for us today. There is a short coffee break now and another panel then running from 5 to 6. But I would like to thank you from my side. I would also like to thank the mission because they have been organizing this event and they are continuing organizing it. And thanks to you all, and particular thanks to all the panelists here. Thank you.